Combien pour ce bouquet, mademoiselle? The man's voice was smooth, laced with the unmistakable accent of Paris. A tourist in a crisp linen shirt bent down, examining the daisies in her hands. Around them, people passing by on the New York street barely slowed. To them, she was just a flower girl, another face in the blur of vendors hustling for survival. Some even cast her pitying glances, assuming she couldn't understand a single word of the foreign tongue being spoken to her, but her eyes lit up. She straightened her back, her voice warm and clear. $12, monsieur, she replied in fluent French. Et ces fleurs, elles viennent avec une histoire. $12 and a story. The man blinked, startled. Then curiosity spread across his face as she continued, effortlessly weaving French words into a poetic description of the flowers and, without being asked, the history of the very street they were standing on. Pedestrians slowed. Whispers passed through the crowd. Wait. Did she just... She speaking French? Thought she was just some dropout kid. The moment was electric. The air shifted. Combien pour ce bouquet, mademoiselle? The voice was deep, smooth, and touched with the unmistakable music of Paris. A man in his mid-40s bent forward slightly, adjusting his sunglasses as he pointed at a bunch of white daisies tied with a pale blue ribbon. His crisp linen shirt, neatly pressed khakis, and leather satchel suggested he was a tourist, comfortable, curious, and unhurried. Around them, New York's Broadway pulsed with its usual chaos. Yellow cabs honking, street musicians competing with subway performers, business people rushing by with coffee cups in hand, and tourists snapping photos of nearly everything. Against this backdrop stood Sofia Alvarez, her small wooden cart filled with buckets of roses, tulips, daisies, and wildflowers she had gathered before dawn. To most passers-by, Sofia was invisible. Just another street vendor, her hair tied in a messy ponytail, her hands slightly worn from the daily ritual of trimming stems and changing water. Some people pitied her. Others dismissed her with a glance, assuming she was uneducated, just scraping by, clinging to survival. A couple walking past slowed down, smirking as they heard the man's French question. "She has no idea what he's saying," the woman whispered. "Yeah, poor girl," the man replied. But then, Sofia's lips curved into the faintest smile. She lifted her chin, and her dark eyes lit up with a spark that cut through the city noise. $12, monsieur," she answered in flawless French. Her voice was smooth, confident, and carried the melodic rhythm of a practiced speaker. Then she added with a gentle warmth, "Et ces fleurs, elles viennent avec une histoire." $12 and a story. The Frenchman froze. His sunglasses slid slightly down his nose, revealing wide, surprised eyes. The couple who had mocked her stopped in their tracks. A teenager with headphones pulled one bud out of his ear. Even the old woman dragging a grocery cart nearby slowed her steps. Sofia didn't falter. Her voice, calm yet radiant, wove into the air like a melody cutting through the city's harsh rhythm. She described the daisies not merely as flowers, but as symbols of resilience, once cultivated by immigrant families who had lived and worked in the very neighborhood where they were standing. She painted a picture of history, of how Broadway had once been a trail used by Native Americans before it became the artery of a restless city, of how waves of immigrants had built lives here, each leaving invisible roots. The Frenchman tilted his head, fascinated. His lips parted slightly, as if he wanted to interrupt, but he let her continue. Sofia spoke with ease, as though she were guiding a tour group through centuries of New York's hidden stories, except her audience, for now, was just one man and an accidental crowd. Whispers rippled around her cart. "She speaks French?" "I thought she was just some dropout girl." "Where did she learn that?" For months, maybe years, Sofia had endured the sting of being overlooked, judged and underestimated. But in that moment, she was no longer invisible. Every word she spoke in French seemed to tear away a layer of assumption from the faces staring at her. The man finally broke his silence, switching into careful English. You speak French beautifully. You know the history of this city?" Sofia paused, lowering her gaze for a moment. She could have shrugged it off, could have brushed away the question with a half answer. But something inside her, something that had been silent too long, wanted to be heard. "Yes," she said softly, but clearly. "I studied it. Once." Her words hung in the air. Around them the city didn't stop, but it seemed to bend for a heartbeat, letting the moment expand. People who had never given her more than a passing glance were now leaning closer, listening. The Frenchman frowned, his curiosity deepening. "You should not be selling flowers here," he said, his accent thick but his tone sincere. "You should be teaching, guiding. Why are you here?" Sofia opened her mouth, then closed it again. The truth was heavy. She wanted to tell him about the university, about the dreams she had nursed, about the family troubles that had torn them apart. But the words caught in her throat. Instead, she forced a small, graceful smile. "Sometimes," she whispered, "life changes the script." The Frenchman looked at her for a long moment, as though trying to solve a puzzle. Then, with a slow nod, he pulled out his wallet. "I will take the daisies, and thank you for the story." He handed her a 20, refusing change, and walked away, still glancing back as if uncertain he had really encountered what just happened. But the moment was not over. The crowd lingered. An office worker who had stopped now looked at Sofia differently, admiration softening his once indifferent expression. A group of college students whispered among themselves, sneaking glances at her as if she were suddenly more than a street vendor. Even the old woman with the grocery cart gave a nod of respect. Sofia could feel it. The shift. For so long she had been unseen, but now the veil had lifted, and the city, even if only for a fleeting moment, saw her. Not just a flower girl, but a young woman with knowledge, with fire, with a story worth telling. Her hands trembled as she rearranged the bouquets, pretending to busy herself. But inside, her chest burned with something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. That night, as Sofia wheeled her small wooden cart back through the dim streets of Queens, her mind refused to stay in the present. The scent of daisies and roses clung to her hands, but her thoughts drifted backward, to another version of herself. 2 years earlier, she had not been a flower vendor, but a student at New York University. She remembered the wide lecture halls, the sound of pages turning, the professors who spoke about history with reverence. Sofia had always taken the front row, her notebooks filled with meticulous notes in 3 languages, English, French, and Spanish. She wasn't just good at languages, she loved them. To Sofia, every word in a foreign tongue was a doorway into another culture, another perspective. French had been her favorite. She practiced it on the subway, whispering verbs under her breath, reciting museum brochures as though preparing for an audience. She dreamed of becoming a tour guide, leading visitors through New York's museums, galleries, and landmarks. Her professor, Dr. Rosen, often praised her. "You don't just memorize facts, Sofia," he said once after class. "You tell stories. That's what makes history come alive. Don't ever lose that gift." She remembered smiling then, her cheeks warm with pride. For the first time in her life, she felt like she was standing on a path that could lead somewhere meaningful. But even in those days, shadows loomed. Her father's restaurant in Queens, Alvarez Family Grill, was struggling. Business had slowed after new chain restaurants opened nearby. Sofia often worked there at night, waiting tables after her classes. She remembered her father's tired smile as he tried to assure her everything would be fine. "Don't worry about us, mijija," he'd say, patting her hand. "Study. That's your job. We'll manage." But she had noticed the bills stacked on the counter. She had noticed the way her father's voice cracked when he said the word manage. Then came her mother's illness. At first, it was just fatigue. Then a series of doctor's visits, tests, medications. Insurance only covered a portion. Sofia watched as her father's shoulders bent lower under the weight. One evening, she came home from campus to find him sitting in the dark, his hands covering his face. The restaurant had closed that day, not because of choice, but because there was nothing left to serve. "We're finished," he whispered. His voice was broken in a way she had never heard before. "I can't keep it open anymore." Sofia's heart ached as she looked around their small apartment. She thought of her tuition, her textbooks, her dorm fees. She realized then that her dreams were pressing down on her family like an extra burden. She tried to fight it. She picked up more shifts at the restaurant before it closed, then babysitting jobs, even tutoring sessions in French and Spanish. She told herself she could balance it all, but by the end of the semester, exhaustion consumed her. She fell asleep in class more than once. Her grades slipped, and though her professors offered help, they couldn't erase the reality. Her scholarship covered only tuition. Rent, medical bills, food, those were still waiting at home. One rainy night, she sat in her dorm room staring at a letter of overdue payment. Her eyes blurred with tears. She called her father. "I'll leave school," she whispered. "It's too much. You need me." On the other end of the line, her father's silence spoke louder than words. Finally, he said, "You deserve better than this, Sofia. But I can't stop you." She withdrew the next day. Walking out of the university building for the last time, she carried her box of books and notes as if she were burying a part of herself. She remembered staring at the Washington Square arch and thinking, "This is the last time I'll pass here as a student." From that moment, survival became her new syllabus. She took odd jobs, cleaning offices at night, handing out flyers on the streets, working part-time at a bakery. But none of them brought in enough money. Then one morning, while walking through the flower district, she saw vendors selling wholesale buckets of fresh blooms. An idea sparked. She used her small savings to buy a few bouquets and stood at a corner near Broadway. The first day was humiliating. People walked past her without looking. Some even sneered. One man muttered, "Another dropout trying to hustle." She went home with only a few crumpled bills and aching feet. But she returned the next day, and the next. Slowly, she learned how to arrange the flowers better, how to call out prices in a way that caught attention, how to smile even when her heart felt heavy. Still, the judgment never stopped. People glanced at her cart and saw only failure. They didn't see the young woman who once studied art history and cultural heritage, who once dreamed of guiding international visitors through the story of America's greatest city. They didn't hear the French verbs she still whispered to herself when she was alone, afraid she might forget them. And yet, Sofia refused to let go completely. Each night, after counting her small earnings, she read old brochures and books, keeping her knowledge alive. She told herself that one day, somehow, she might use it again. She didn't know that one day would come much sooner than she expected. Morning always came too quickly for Sofia. By 5 o'clock, she was already awake, her hands cold from rinsing the glass jars she used as vases. She slipped into the quiet streets of Queens, her cart rattling softly as she headed toward the flower district in Manhattan. The vendors there knew her now. She was the young woman who always asked about prices with sharp calculation, who handled each stem with care as if flowers were fragile souls. They liked her determination, though they rarely asked about her story. Sofia preferred it that way. She didn't want pity. By 7 o'clock, she had claimed her corner near Broadway. The city around her was alive with the clamor of cabs, the chatter of tourists, and the impatient rhythm of office workers. She arranged her flowers carefully, roses in front, daisies and tulips along the sides, and small wildflowers tucked in jars like secrets waiting to be noticed. Then came the stares. They were always the same. The glances that slid over her cart with disdain. The murmurs that brushed against her ears like cold drafts. High school dropout. Such a shame. She's young and stuck here. Bet she doesn't even know a word of English properly. Each word pierced, though Sofia had long learned to keep her face steady. She would smile, lift a bouquet, and call out prices. Sometimes she sold quickly. Sometimes hours passed without a single sale. One afternoon, a businessman in a sharp suit stopped by her cart. He looked at the roses, then at her, his lips curling with arrogance. How much? $15, Sofia said politely. He chuckled. Do you even know what these are worth? Or did someone teach you enough math to count that high? Heat rushed to her cheeks. She wanted to lash back, to tell him she had once solved complex economic models in a tourism course, that she could explain to him in French or Spanish how trade routes influenced flower markets centuries ago. But she stayed quiet. She simply repeated, $15. He sneered, dropped a crumpled bill into her jar, and walked away with the roses as if he had won something. When he was gone, Sofia let out a slow breath. She bent down, rearranging the daisies with trembling fingers. In her mind, she repeated French verbs. Je suis, tu es, il est. It was her private ritual. Every insult, every slight, she balanced with a whisper of knowledge, proof to herself that she was more than what the world saw. At night, when the streets emptied and she returned home, she opened old textbooks she could not bear to throw away. Pages worn, margins scribbled with notes, they smelled faintly of campus libraries. She studied them by the dim light of her bedside lamp, her mother asleep in the next room. Sometimes she practiced by speaking to her reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror. Bienvenue a New York. Welcome to New York. Bienvenidos a Nueva York. She imagined herself standing before a group of tourists, pointing at landmarks, telling stories that connected past and present. But reality waited at dawn with its buckets of flowers and its passing judgments. There were moments, however, when kindness broke through. Once, a little girl tugged her mother's sleeve and pointed at Sofia's tulips. Mommy, the flower lady looks like a princess. The mother smiled awkwardly, buying a single stem, and Sofia bent down to the girl's height. Did you know, she whispered, that tulips once caused a frenzy in Holland so big that people traded their houses for a single bulb? The girl's eyes widened. Really? Yes, Sofia said softly. Flowers can carry whole histories inside them. The mother looked startled, then grateful, as if she had glimpsed something deeper in Sofia. But they walked away, and soon the city's noise swallowed the moment whole. Most days were not like that. Most days were filled with silence broken only by dismissive comments. Sofia learned to wear a mask, polite, detached, unshaken. But inside, she wrestled with the ache of invisibility. Still, she refused to let her dreams die. Each time she saw a tourist map crumpled in the trash, she picked it up, smoothing it out and memorizing the landmarks again. She traced routes with her finger late at night, whispering their stories in French, Spanish, and English. Her father once caught her doing this. He stood quietly at the doorway, watching her lips move over the words. You haven't let it go, he said softly. Sofia looked up, guilty. I can't. It feels like if I stop, then all of it was for nothing. He nodded, his eyes tired but proud. Hold on to it, mi hija. One day you'll need it again. Those words lived inside her, even on the hardest days. Then came the afternoon that would change everything. The sky was pale blue, the kind of spring day when the city feels both impatient and alive. Sofia had just finished arranging a bouquet of daisies when she noticed the man in the linen shirt stepping closer. His sunglasses reflected the sunlight. He smiled politely, pointing at the flowers. "Combien pour ce bouquet, mademoiselle?" The words rang out clear, wrapped in the accent of Paris. Sofia froze for only a second. A familiar fire stirred in her chest. She could have answered in English, simple and quick. But no. Something in her heart leapt at the chance. $12, monsieur, she replied, her voice smooth and sure. Et ces fleurs, elles viennent avec une histoire. Her French danced into the air, crisp and graceful. The man's eyebrows shot upward, his surprise genuine. Around them, the city shifted. Pedestrians slowed. Whispers began. Eyes turned toward the flower girl who suddenly was no longer invisible. Sofia kept speaking, letting her knowledge pour out. The history of the street, the immigrant families who once lived nearby, the story of daisies as symbols of resilience. Her words painted pictures, her voice carrying a rhythm of confidence long buried but never lost. And for the first time in years, she felt alive in the way she had once dreamed, as a storyteller, as a guide, as more than what the world believed her to be. The Frenchman's question lingered in the air, thick with challenge. "You should not be here selling flowers," he said, his English careful but weighted with conviction. "You belong in front of people, teaching, guiding. Why are you here?" The words struck Sofia like a bell. For a heartbeat, she froze. The crowd leaned closer, sensing the tension, waiting for her answer. Her throat tightened. She wanted to tell him everything, the years of study, the family crisis, the endless nights spent keeping her knowledge alive while the world dismissed her. But those were private wounds. They did not belong to the crowd, nor to this stranger with his sunglasses and linen shirt. So she chose a gentler truth. "Sometimes," she whispered, her voice steady but soft, "life changes the script." The Frenchman studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he nodded, as if acknowledging the weight behind her words. He slipped a $20 bill into her hand. "Keep it," he said, "and thank you for reminding me that beauty is not only in flowers but in the stories behind them." He walked away, bouquet in hand. But the crowd stayed. For a moment, silence hovered. New York's noise seemed to dim, replaced by a hum of curiosity. An office worker holding his coffee muttered, "She really speaks French." A teenager whispered to her friend, "She knows history too. Did you hear that?" The old woman with the grocery cart, the one who always passed Sofia without a glance, lingered now, her lips pressed tightly together. Something in her eyes had softened, as though regret had cracked her indifference. Sofia bent down, pretending to rearrange the daisies, her hands trembling. She wasn't used to this attention. For so long she had been invisible, judged and dismissed, her knowledge tucked away like contraband. Now, under the gaze of strangers, she felt exposed, but also, strangely, free. "Excuse me," a young man in a Yankees cap said, stepping forward. "Were you serious about that? About the immigrants and the daisies?" Sofia looked up, startled. She nodded slowly. "Yes. This area once had a large community of immigrants. They grew food, sold goods, even flowers, along these streets. The daisies were common. They were simple, affordable, and they became symbols of resilience." The young man whistled softly. "I never knew that." He turned to his girlfriend. "Did you?" She shook her head. "Not at all." More questions followed. "What about the tulips?" asked someone. "Do you know anything about the theater nearby?" Another chimed in. Sofia's pulse raced. Her instinct was to shrink back, to retreat into the safety of silence. But another part of her, the student, the storyteller, rose up. She answered with confidence, weaving together fragments of knowledge she had carried like hidden treasures. She told them about Dutch traders and tulip mania, about Broadway's transformation from a Native American trail to a bustling avenue, about the layers of history buried beneath the pavement. Her voice gained strength with each word. The crowd leaned closer, drawn not just by her knowledge but by the passion that lit her face. For the first time in years, Sofia felt the thrill of sharing her love for history without shame. Among the listeners stood a woman with a phone held discreetly at her chest. She was recording, her eyes wide with fascination. She worked for a small local magazine, though Sofia did not know it yet. To her, this moment was gold, a flower vendor transforming into a historian before an astonished crowd. As Sofia finished explaining the tulips, a hush settled over the group. For a moment, the street corner felt less like a vendor's stall and more like an open-air classroom. Then, someone began to clap. Just one person at first, hesitant. But soon others joined, the sound of applause echoing against the buildings. Sofia's cheeks burned. She bowed her head slightly, unsure what to do with the sudden rush of respect. She glanced at the daisies, still trembling in her hands. She had sold flowers for months, enduring whispers and insults, but never applause. The old woman with the grocery cart stepped closer. Her voice was quiet but firm. "I walked by you every day," she admitted. "I thought you were just a girl with no options. I was wrong." Sofia's heart tightened. She searched the woman's eyes, seeing honesty there. Slowly, she nodded. "It's all right," she whispered. "People always do, until they listen." The crowd began to disperse, but their expressions had changed. They no longer looked through her. They looked at her, and for once, they saw. That night, Sofia returned home with fewer bouquets but a heart that felt fuller than it had in years. She replayed the moment again and again, the Frenchman's question, her own answer, the way the crowd had listened. For so long, she had believed her knowledge was useless without a classroom, a stage, or a tour group. But today had shown her that her voice still mattered, even on a street corner. She set the flowers on the table, her mother glancing at her from the sofa. "You're smiling," her mother said softly. "It's been a long time since I saw you smile like that." Sofia brushed her fingers over the petals. "Something happened today," she whispered. "Something different." She didn't explain further. How could she? How could she put into words the way strangers' eyes had shifted from pity to admiration? The way the city had, for a fleeting moment, paused to hear her? That night, she dreamed of standing before a group of tourists again, not in a lecture hall, not in a fantasy, but in the living, breathing reality of New York. What she didn't know was that her moment on the street had not ended there. The video recorded by the woman in the crowd was already making its way online, gathering views, comments, and shares. By morning, strangers across the city, and beyond, would know about the flower girl who spoke French. When Sofia rolled her cart into her usual corner the next morning, she expected nothing more than the routine. Arranging bouquets, calling out prices, enduring glances both kind and cruel. But something was different. A small group of people stood waiting near her spot, their phones out, their eyes curious. She frowned, her steps slowing. "Are you the girl from the video?" one of them asked eagerly. Sofia blinked. "The video?" The young woman thrust her phone forward. On the screen, Sofia saw herself, her own face lit with determination as she spoke in French, her voice clear, her hands gesturing toward the flowers. The caption read, "The flower girl who speaks French and teaches history on Broadway." The clip had thousands of views. Comments scrolled beneath it. "Incredible! I walked past her once and never realized. She should be giving tours, not selling flowers." Proof that people are more than they appear. Sofia's knees nearly buckled. She grabbed the handle of her cart for balance, her heart thudding. This moment, the one she had thought would vanish as quickly as it came, was alive, spreading, growing. The rest of the day was unlike any she had ever known. Strangers approached not to dismiss her but to ask questions. Some wanted to hear the story of the daisies again. Others asked her to speak in French, Spanish, or English, marveling at her fluency. A man in a suit bought 3 bouquets and insisted on paying double, saying, "Your story made my morning better." Even the old woman with the grocery cart stopped once more, her voice gentler than ever. "You're not just a flower girl," she said. "I see that now. I was wrong." Sofia smiled softly. "It's all right. People usually are, until they listen." That night, when she returned home, her father was waiting at the table, holding his phone. His eyes shone with a mix of pride and disbelief. "Mija, do you know how many people have seen this?" he asked. "You're everywhere. People are talking about you." Her mother, frail but smiling, reached out to squeeze her hand. "I always knew," she whispered. "Now the world knows too." The days that followed felt like stepping into someone else's life. Reporters came to her corner, asking questions, snapping photographs. She tried to answer humbly, keeping her cart steady as the world swirled around her. Then came the email. It was from a Manhattan tour company. The subject line read, "We would love to meet you." Her hands trembled as she read it aloud to her parents. They wanted her to join their team, guiding international visitors through the city's landmarks. They had seen the video, they admired her languages and her knowledge, and they believed she belonged with them. Tears blurred Sofia's vision. For months, she had whispered history to herself in the shadows, convinced the world had no use for her voice. Now, an open door waited. On her last morning as a flower vendor, Sofia wheeled her cart to Broadway one final time. She wasn't there to sell, but to give. She handed out flowers for free, roses to a young couple, tulips to a tourist, daisies to a child who laughed with delight. When the old woman with the grocery cart appeared, Sofia pressed her final bouquet, a bundle of daisies, into her hands. "These are yours," Sofia said softly. The woman's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you, and I'm sorry." Sofia shook her head. "There's nothing to forgive. People see what they want until they see more." The woman hugged the daisies to her chest, whispering, "You changed the way I look at people." Her first day with the tour company was nothing short of surreal. She stood before a group of French tourists outside the Metropolitan Museum, her voice steady as she welcomed them in their native language. Their faces lit up with surprise and delight, just as the Frenchman's had on Broadway. "Bienvenue à New York," she said. "Welcome to New York. Today I will tell you the stories hidden in these walls." And as she led them through the halls, pointing out paintings and sculptures, weaving history with passion, Sofia felt the weight of her past transform into strength. Every hardship, every insult, every night spent whispering verbs into the darkness had led her here. She was no longer invisible. She was a guide, a storyteller, a bridge between cultures. Months later, Sofia returned to Broadway, not with a cart, but with a small group of tourists trailing behind her. She paused at the very corner where her story had changed. "This," she told them with a quiet smile, "was once my stage. I sold flowers here. People thought that was all I was. But this city, it listens eventually. It saw me." Her tourists listened, wide-eyed, as traffic roared and life bustled around them. To them, she wasn't a vendor. She was the voice of the city itself, carrying stories in every syllable. Sofia glanced at the skyline, the sun glinting off the glass towers. For years, she had looked up at it and felt small. Now she looked and felt part of it, woven into its story, its struggles, its triumphs. She touched the daisies tucked in her bag, her quiet reminder of resilience. And with a deep breath, Sofia Alvarez stepped forward, not as a flower girl, not as a dropout, but as a woman who had reclaimed her story,